Jesus said, I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not even withhold your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you. And if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. It's worth hearing those words again, even if there were just a couple of seconds between what I proclaimed in the midst of you as the gospel and what I proclaim to you right here. It's worth hearing those words again and again and again, to let them sink into your soul and become part of your very DNA. Hear those words, because words matter. Words matter. Do unto others as you would have them do to you, and say to others what you would have them say to you. Now, there was a time way back in the day when dinosaurs ruled the earth, when my mother would try and comfort me from some unpleasantness after school by saying, now, Cindy, just remember, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Oh, Mama. Oh, Mama, if only, if only. And I was also raised with the saying, actions speak louder than words. But these days, words are formed like missiles with the same devastating impact exploding on contact. And it doesn't help that we have national leaders who use name-calling and invectives with impunity. It makes it seem normal, and beloved, we have to remember that's not normal. That's not normal in the secular world, and it's certainly not normal for those of us who follow the way of love, the way of Jesus. Now, I just came back from Boston last night, and as I was telling some other people, I'm not jet lagged, I am a little brain lagged, so you may just have to bear with me a little bit. I was there to present a meditation on what it meant to be a pilgrim. One of my co-presenters was the Reverend Dr. Gary Mason from Ireland. He's the founder of Rethinking Conflict. Now, for Gary, being a pilgrim means taking people into areas of conflict to learn what it means to talk and to listen to one another. To talk and to listen to one another, maybe for the first time. And Gary earned his stripes in Northern Ireland, where he was an integral part of the peace process. So integral that his work was formally recognized by Queen Elizabeth. Now that work continues, and you know, if you follow the news, you know that the turmoil surrounding Brexit in the UK is a cause for concern for those in the peace movement in Northern Ireland. But Gary has expanded his ministry, and taking people into conflicts, areas of conflict, for him now doesn't just mean Ireland, it means taking people like us to Israel, to be exposed to conflict transformation between Palestinians and Jews. And it also means coming into this country and rethinking our own conflict between races and now political parties. It's having what Gary calls the uncomfortable conversation. And it means listening. Listening. Or in the words of the Kairos movement, leaning into that mission statement, listen, listen, love, love. Not too long ago, Gary took pilgrims from this country to expose them to the conflict between Palestinians and the Jews. And it wasn't just to expose them to that conflict. It was to help them reflect on their own conflict here in this country. Because the pilgrims were made up of Trump supporters and Clinton supporters right after the election. Can you imagine how comfortable that was? But being exposed to the conflict in Israel gave them a new understanding and a new way to see the conflict they were experiencing as representatives of their own various political parties. It was leading them to the place of the uncomfortable conversation. For us, it's a reminder that conflict isn't something that just happens out there. Beloved, it is happening right here, right now. Which brings me back to Jesus. Which brings me back to love. To love our neighbor as ourselves means listening to our neighbor with the heart of Jesus. Making that part of our day-to-day life. If we see Democrats or Republicans or white people or black people as the other, then know that that is how they see us as well. The other. The other. So you practice the way of love. Day in and day out. You practice the way of love. Which can lead to something extraordinary. Like extraordinary acts of forgiveness. And when I see those extraordinary acts of forgiveness, I try to look behind the act to see how people got there. Because it probably wasn't overnight. Now, because the news cycle spins so fast, we kind of forget our own recent past. So let me ask this. Do you remember the massacre of 9 African Americans at Emmanuel Church in Charleston just 4 years ago? And it was just 4 years ago. Do you remember that they had gathered on a Wednesday evening for a Bible study, and that they had welcomed into their fellowship a young white man, Dylan Roof? They didn't know that Roof was a white supremacist who came not to learn about Jesus but to kill, intentionally kill, and he did. Roof killed 9 African Americans while they sat there with their Bibles open. Their Bibles open. And the news went out almost immediately. And almost immediately news crews were there to cover all the excruciating details of that tragedy. You know, the usual things. Faces contorted by anguish and shock. Maybe they could get a film of some blood-stained clothes. But the usual news narrative was changed that night. It was changed in the following days by prayer and then by forgiveness. And even as the police were still sorting out the crime scene and trying to determine who in the world would perpetuate such a crime, people were gathering in front of Emmanuel Church in small groups to pray. And it was the prayer groups that began to dictate the news narrative. It was the images of prayer groups that began to fill our screens. And when Dylan Roof was captured, an unrepentant white supremacist, he is still an unrepentant white supremacist. He was faced with the families of the victims. And he was faced with forgiveness. Now, not everybody uttered words of forgiveness, but enough did. Enough did. It became national news again. Forgiveness does not mean excusing the crime. Forgiveness does mean it didn't matter. It does matter. It matters greatly. It matters so greatly. It means you are not going to live the rest of your life out in a prison sentence of hate or grief or resentment. It means choosing the way of love and living into the practice of love. And I think the word practice is the operative word. The people of Mother Emanuel have been practicing the way of love for years. Prayer and forgiveness didn't just happen that night. It didn't happen overnight. They'd been practicing it for years. They'd been practicing the way of love even when they went into a grocery store and a white person might hold their purse a little bit closer to their bodies because a black person had passed them in the grocery store. Practicing the way of love for them meant even when a mother or a father has to sit down with their children, especially sit down with their African American son, and tell him all the things people might accuse him of just because he's a person of color. Can you imagine how excruciating it is to have that kind of conversation? Yet, beloved, there are people right here in our own church who have had to have that kind of talk with their children. Can you imagine? You practice the way of love every day. We practice the way of love every day. We hold ourselves open to the uncomfortable conversations every day because that is where Jesus is. Love your enemies, Jesus says. Do good to those who hate you. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. If you do not like the national dialogue between political parties, change it. Change it. Right here, right now. Ask yourself in every encounter, am I speaking or acting as Jesus would have me do? Could you ever imagine Jesus calling somebody an undesirable? Can you imagine? Can you ever imagine Jesus calling someone an idiot? Well, that part may be. No, you can't. You can't imagine Jesus using those words. If I don't like the increasing divide between black and brown and white, am I willing to imagine what life is like for that individual and then look for that way of love and reconciliation every single day? And when it gets rough, and it will, it does. When it gets rough, and when you are exhausted, and you will be, if you practice the way of love, you come here. You come here. You come to this place to be fed by Jesus and to be upheld by this community. Beloved, this is the place where we do not all think alike, but we try to act alike by acting like Jesus and by practicing the way of love. Practice makes perfect. It won't be perfect till we see Jesus face to face, but practice does make perfect. So, beloved, practice the way of love. In Jesus' name.
Amen.